So yeah, and in this presentation, I'll be drawing from the research I was conducting in the Bristol University since 2023. The project's pretty much wrapped up in terms of empirical data, but I'm still trying to publicize it to people and share it with you. And actually, I was on the Gemini Call many years ago. So it's nice to revisit some of you here once the project is finished. So let me start with acknowledging that actually many presentations before and after this one will be trying to define what digital twins are. And there has been many attempts to do that from both authoritative sources like Catapult Network or the government. But in fact, the reality is that each sector leverages its own definition in their own way, pointing out different potential advantages and different elements of the tech stack. And I guess because of this lack of definitional clarity, some people dismiss it as a buzzword. But actually, in academia, we find buzzwords really exciting and interesting, and we think that this is something that we should look closely at, precisely because of kind of the big pool that they have when it comes to mobilizing people and kind of calling everyone to action. So I think the buzz aspect of the twin is precisely what's worth researching, and also it's important because digital twin developers and governments have been spending millions of euros and pounds on R&D in recent years. So the question here, emerges: was that money well spent? And then in the future, how to steer funders towards responsible innovation, which turns pilots into economic growth, grid stability, or sustainability without any waste. So for that reason, in this project, I have been using the lens of hype studies to analyze the landscape of digital twin development in the context of UK energy industry. And I guess what I mean by hype I should also define. I mean by it's a state of anticipation generated through circulation or promotion, which often happens at the expense of discussing existing properties of technology or culture or a field. And in order to frame my presentation, I will share some previous research on promises coming from a field called Science and Technology Studies. So this is a book by University of Edinburgh professors Neil Pollock and Robin Williams, who have been interviewing Gartner consultants. Probably you've heard about Gartner as a company. They are the creators of the so-called hype cycle. And by the way, there is no scientific basis for the cycle. There's no evidence that innovations necessarily go through these stages in exactly these order. And actually, it's more of a kind of heuristic or kind of, in a way, marketing tool for Gartner itself. And the cycle, as you can see, the diagram doesn't even have a cyclical shape, so I don't know why it's called a cycle. And similarly with the technology readiness levels, it assumes that innovation sort of always progresses. But often we hear from failure stories of innovation that innovations can also just be stuck at level 4 or level 5 and so on. So anyway, during interviews with Gartner, consultants admitted that their role was about creating an impression of correct predictions of the future. But since predicting the future of innovation is inherently difficult, if not impossible, consultants would engage in periodical renaming of their technologies so that they wouldn't be accountable for their predictions. So, and I guess we can see a similar trend in digital twins. So the tech stack associated with it can range. Say if you Meta, you say that it's about metaverse and VR. If you work in urban planning, you say it's about GIS, or maybe if you work in infrastructure space, you say it's about sensors. So depending what you try to develop and sell, the essence of digital twin will differ. So here's a summary of my methods. So for the past several months, I was engaged in what we call multi-sited ethnography of the digital twin initiatives in the UK. So basically it means that I've immersed myself in the world of digital twins. So it's a bit like a Louis Theroux for digital twins, let's say. I've attended lots of industry events, conferences, interviews, basically any opportunities I would have. I wanted to speak to people, whether online or in person. And Energy Systems Catapult have been the partner of the project, and they have been really helpful with participant recruitment, with sharing their views, and also with offering the platform to share findings through a blog and webinar. So I guess the question is, why would it matter how kind of various practitioners frame digital twins? So here's my sort of TLDR results slides. So my argument is that digital twins hype matters because it does 4 things. So first of all, it mobilizes people, energy and resources for commissioning of pilot projects. It leads to disappointment once the operational issues of poor data access show. 3, it allows a quiet realignment of framing. So from understanding digital twins as models to digital twins as data sharing infrastructures. 4, it conceals some aspects of politics. So in the case of energy industry, we found that it was mostly about concealing transparency in procurement, potential monopoly power of providers of APIs, and lack of collaborations between lawyers and software engineers over the issue of interoperability. And that's this concealing is not always intentional. It's sometimes it happens because because people want to get things done and want to progress things rather than maybe stop and reflect. So now let me tell you about these issues in more detail. So let's start with stage mobilization. So I guess in the first stage, participants told me that when digital twins kind of networks first launched, that they were explicitly kept broad. The funding call were as vague as possible to attract a so-called broad triage of people and inspire them with ambitious visions. And here, demonstrators are critical to understanding of innovation culture. So for example, there were some grand visions leveraged, like creating a replica of the entire UK grid, but it's okay, they didn't have to be built, they have to be demonstrated. So in this case, pilot projects demonstrated elements of technical feasibility of the larger idea. So for example, that the code could run if someone was to apply Bayesian modeling to predict scenario, but again, that was using the dummy data, sorry, not gummy data, or perhaps that it will be possible to create attractive visualizations for predictive maintenance, again, all using dummy synthetic data. And here, this leads us to the crux of the problem, namely actually accessing data from energy companies, especially if working across organizations. And I guess at this stage, we also saw a lot of discussions about data ethics. So a very particular vision of data ethics was promoted, which was mostly oriented around responsible software development practices. So kind of very much person-centered. And the key practices that were promoted were removing biases, improving end-user trust, or representing phenomena accurately with data. So again, kind of the onus, the responsibility was put on the data scientist who was working with the models. And then moving to second stage, I've noticed that while my informants were excited about pilot projects at conferences and webinars, actually in private, they revealed impatience with this demonstration culture, and argued for proper strategic mandate from the government. So soon after, the momentum slowed down a bit, and mostly because digital twins did not make a cut for the kind of 5 critical tech at the time. So, that was the previous government. So the kind of slicing of what's considered critical tech, the industry strategy was slightly different. But at the time, we had artificial intelligence, engineering, biology, future telecoms, semiconductors, and quantum. And digital twins were apparently kind of just under the line for kind of criticality, let's say, which means essentially that digital twins, the theme, have missed out on strategic investments from the government on a scale of billions of pounds. And in our kind of recalling of the event by the interviews, they admitted that they did not win because of a lack of clear vision at the time. So I think at the heart of this shortcoming, there was an inherent juxtaposition that on the one hand, there were many kind of visions for 2030 for digital twins and beyond. Let funding at the time was confirmed for pilot projects, which often would be limited to a few week-long sprints. And also at the time, I did several candid interviews with innovators who simply admitted that they struggled with developing a business model for digital twins, and the reality, because it's simply difficult to work with industry data. So at this stage, I heard plenty of calls for setting up a central office for orchestrating data sharing, or kind of similar phrases. And this move to coordination and data sharing would be done by a communal trust solution. And surprise, surprise, this realignment actually happened. So reflecting on the hype, I think this is this certain convenience and ambiguity around buzzwords, which actually allowed stakeholders to successfully and kind of quietly realign their priorities while externally projecting a kind of continuity of the program. So, what I've noticed a lot in, say, releases, say, from key institutes like Alan Turing or from Department of Business and Transports, that again, the locus of the conversation was less about models and less about replicas, but it was more about these ecosystems of data sharing. And that's not to say that there was no concern with data sharing beforehand, but this was like the new key priority, let's say. And even in the words of one of my participants, who said, you should write a critical paper on the need for caution with terminology. Digital twin agenda was never about cybernetic system, but about interoperability. But I guess what's interesting to me now that interoperability itself can also soon become a buzzword, and there's a risk that we will, as a community, disagree on actually what do we mean by sharing, and with whom, for what reason, on what terms, and so on. And so far, interoperability has been expressed in multiple ways. So, first of all, as a policy vision for mutually beneficial cross-organization collaboration, as a legal intervention to prevent monopolization or incentivize competition, and also as a set of technical metadata standards to enable all parties to understand each other. But most importantly, people who leverage these definitions, so say policymakers, lawyers, and technologies, tend to discuss these ideas in separation, which I think limits our ability to see the kind of politics and ethics hidden in databases or data formats. And this inability to see politics brings me to the final stage of the analysis. So this kind of notion of concealment of ethical and political issues related to digital twins. So things that we explicitly identified in the paper that we recently wrote is about transparent procurement of IT within kind of government structures. Second, the idea of public engagement and grid upgrades, issues of data sharing and consent more specifically, and finally, sustainable financing of public IT projects. I'm just going to move quickly to kind of next steps and outputs. So here's the list of various publications I've been releasing as a part of this project. So I did a peer-reviewed paper, which is basically this presentation, but in a long format, and several webinars, one actually on energy system catapult, which is kind of, again, very much longer version of this presentation. I am now a member of the data sharing working group, which is convened by Connected Places Catapult. So this is also a really nice, active working group, which tries to define and kind of progress practically what do we mean by data sharing. I've been active with policy consultations, blog posts with Energy Systems Catapult. I've organized a Hype Studies conference in Barcelona in September, and I've launched a website, Energy Futures Co UK, where kind of I store all the research related to energy industry findings. And very quickly on next steps. So I'm continuing to build a network of practitioners, academics, artists who are interested in hype as a kind of narrative force, what it does to our lives, what it does to the state of media. So please follow us on LinkedIn or check out our website. I'm also working on this kind of card game called Oblique Maneuvers, where I'm trying to create a tool for digital innovators to kind of be a little bit more candid about their innovations. And so it's a work in progress. You can check out the website, but it's only 30% there, let's say. So I'm encouraged to revisit it in early 2026. We also have a digital twin facility at the Bristol University, which we are launching at 2026 early, I'd say. So please speak to me about that if you want to know more. And finally, I have also commissioned a series of short stories and poems on digital twins. You can access it online for free, but also I have 10 copies available. So first come, first served, but let me know if you like one. And that's it from me. Here are some references and my email address if you'd like to stay in touch. And thank you very much for your attention.
But so the first question from Paul is there a simple recommendation from the work you've done and the looking at hype? Is there a recommendation for what the community should have done better? Is there a way to avoid this cycle of overpromise, disillusionment, realignment, and concealment?
Yeah, that's a very great question. I mean, I'll be kind of hesitant to give recommendations for the past because, what happened, it already happened. But I think maybe also being cognizant of the kind of pros and cons of hype. So, I mean, I guess most companies have some sort of marketing department or people responsible for marketing, and that's very much necessary. And it's kind of necessary. It's necessary to frame things in a way which is attractive to people and mobilizes them, and gets kind of the whole community around something. So there was definitely a lot of good around digital twin hype, especially in its early days, because otherwise, how do you get that excitement, and how do you convince each other, and how do you convince government that this is something not just, oh, it's not just models, it's something better, it's something more exciting. So, so the good sides around it, but also I think while you're doing this, it's also important to kind of maybe keep a finger on the pulse, and whether if you have a startup, if whether you are yourself living up to the hype, and if you aren't, and I guess your suggestion about maybe making a little bit more sorry, I said didn't, the phrasing is gone, but making more tangible promises, I think would be a good one. Yeah, but definitely being aware of the kind of the good and the bad of the hype as it's kind of happening, I think will be my suggestion in real time.
Fantastic. And obviously you were looking at this through the energy lens, but as part of your work and those that you're working with, did you look at perceptions of digital twins across sectors or communities? I mean, is this a consistent cycle that you're seeing, or do you think there's variation by country or sector?
Oh, I would only know just from attending other people's presentations, but I didn't look at it myself. I think some countries, if there is a government support, they just kind of go all in, and they provide proper funding, not just for like one or two pilots, but they genuinely provide digital transformation funding. So probably imagine a country like Singapore will be the leader, but they've got a completely different reality, completely different politics to it. So I'm not sure if it's comparable. I think also it's worth comparing different sectors in terms of how much, I guess, humanity those digital twins have. So for the lack of better words, so I think in the sectors which are kind of pure kind of engineering systems, say like a digital twin of an airplane engine, I think it's easy to kind of conceptualize it, where the boundaries of the system are, and I think it makes kind of sense as a sales pitch. But the more abstract ideas we bring in, so say like digital twin of, I don't know, I saw once a project about digital twin of depression, so oh, okay, where does it begin, where does it end? The more human, the more abstract concepts you bring in, I think the more there is a danger that this kind of the definitional sort of quality of digital twins and the definitional pool is a little bit dissolved, I think.
Perfect. And that's a great segue, almost like you planned it, segue into the question of how do you think AI is affecting the progress being made for it? So if we've had that realignment into data, it was never really about digital twins, it was about data sharing, it was about interoperability. How do you think AI is affecting the progress on making the case? Is it a help? Is it a hindrance? Is it another distraction? Where are you seeing those conversations in your sector?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll probably provide like a pessimistic academic view. So sorry, this is not very kind of innovation friendly, but I guess I just need to be honest. I think it's a shame that that we're not having maybe more mature conversations about copyright. So I was personally quite disappointed with the UK government's proposals earlier this year, which tried to remove copyright from artists' work. And I think there are some really great cases for scrapping the web, and great cases kind of for building kind of knowledge from the information that we see on the web. But I think certainly with something like art sector, which actually, the UK, that's its soft power, the film industry, book industry, this is like what the country is good at. And I think it's something that we should protect, the kind of human labor behind us. And if AI developers want to have access to that data for training of their models, they should reckon with their intellectual property as a kind of valid concern, rather than try to find workarounds this issue.
Perfect. And across the work you were doing in the energy sector, in addition to people talking about planned digital twins, were you talking to clients who had tried to adopt digital twins?
I guess maybe not so much, because we spoke to a lot of startup innovators and consultants who I guess were working with those, and policymakers. That were kind of our main interview groups. but not so much with the clients. No, sorry. But if you have any useful insights on that, I think that's definitely yeah, a group of a stakeholder group I've missed, and I'd love to hear their views on them on how the development go.
Brilliant. And then the final question I think we'll have time for is digital twins are often seen in the downstream flow. What about at the upstream planning, performance data, straight limitations? So the kind of informing decision makings at the start. Did you look at them across the life cycle in your conversations?
Yeah, I think so. We didn't necessarily differentiate kind of between downstream or upstream. We kind of our inclusion criteria for for interviews, for attending events was things related to the energy sector. And yeah, you're right that these are very good use cases. But I guess the issues that we found was similar across kind of all use case that we encountered was the more you work with external organizations, the more you have to find provisions for accessing their data, and then the more kind of difficult that conversation becomes. So that was sort of, I guess, universal finding to the case study we looked at.
Fantastic. I think it's a fascinating subject. I was particularly taken with your phrase. It didn't have to be built; it had to be demonstrated. As which I think we have all seen. But also, if I can, just a quick reflection from you on the lack of coherent vision, because one of the things that strikes me listening to your presentation is that if you don't have the coherent vision, you end up talking about the terminology or the specific technology while losing the what it was all about. So then when you're going through the realignment phase, it's like, actually, it was never really about that. It was about this other thing. But if the other thing is just another bit of nomenclature or terminology, you're still not any closer to, yeah, but what's the vision of what we're actually trying to achieve, especially from a kind of socio or economic output point of view.
Yeah, I think that's the real. Sorry, what's the question? Sorry.
No. So your reflections on that observation, if you will.
Yeah, I think this is definitely the current risk now with data sharing. So there's the government has suggesting to build this national data library, and we've had a lot of talks with DCID about data sharing within the Connected Places Catapult group on data sharing, and I think sometimes what's I think missing from these groups is understanding how different architecture and marketplaces for data sharing, how they actually will inform how patients, energy consumers, startup founders, how they will all relate to data. So sometimes we very much focus on, okay, how do we build it, and there is less of a focus, okay, how would this world in like 5 to 10 years look like with this particular architecture.